Chapter 4. John F. Kennedy and Civil Rights. John F. Kennedy's stance on civil rights evolved over the course of his presidency, influenced by the changing dynamics of the civil rights movement and the challenges presented by racial segregation and discrimination in the United States. Here's an overview of Kennedy's approach to civil rights. During the 1960 presidential campaign, Kennedy faced pressure from civil rights leaders to take a more assertive stance on the issue. He was cautious, however, not wanting to alienate Southern voters who held significant influence. In his inaugural address on January 20, 1961, Kennedy spoke broadly about the struggle for human rights but did not specifically address civil rights for African Americans. In 1961, the Freedom Rides aimed to challenge segregated interstate bus facilities. Initially, Kennedy did not intervene decisively, but when violence erupted, he eventually took action to enforce federal law and ensure the safety of the riders. Kennedy faced a major civil rights challenge when James Meredith sought admission to the University of Mississippi. After violent confrontations, Kennedy federalized the Mississippi National Guard to ensure Meredith's enrollment. The Birmingham campaign in 1963, marked by protests and police violence, prompted Kennedy to address the nation on the issue of civil rights. He sent a civil rights bill to Congress and spoke in favor of racial equality during a nationally televised address. Following Kennedy's assassination, President Lyndon B. Johnson championed the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which Kennedy had proposed. The act aimed to end segregation in public places and banned employment discrimination on the basis of race, color, religion, sex, or national origin. Kennedy's legacy on civil rights is complex. While he initially moved cautiously on the issue, his actions in response to specific events and growing pressure from the civil rights movement demonstrated a commitment to addressing racial injustice. Kennedy faced criticism from civil rights leaders for not taking more forceful and immediate action. Some argued that he prioritized political considerations over the urgency of the civil rights cause. Although Kennedy's presidency did not witness the passage of major civil rights legislation, his advocacy laid the groundwork for the landmark Civil Rights Act of 1964 and subsequent legislative efforts. In summary, Kennedy's approach to civil rights evolved during his presidency, and he became more engaged with the issue over time. The events of his presidency, including confrontations in the South and the March on Washington, contributed to the momentum that ultimately led to significant civil rights legislation in the years following his tragic assassination. John F. Kennedy's inaugural address, delivered on January 20, 1961, is remembered as one of the most iconic speeches in U.S. history. It captured the spirit of the time, addressed the challenges facing the nation, and articulated Kennedy's vision for the future. Here are key excerpts from his inaugural address. So, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. In the long history of the world, only a few generations have been granted the role of defending freedom in its hour of maximum danger. I do not shrink from this responsibility, I welcome it. The world is very different now. For man holds in his mortal hands the power to abolish all forms of human poverty and all forms of human life. And yet the same revolutionary beliefs for which our forebears fought are still at issue around the globe. Let every nation know, whether it wishes us well or ill, that we shall pay any price, bear any burden, meet any hardship, support any friend, oppose any foe, to assure the survival and the success of liberty. Finally, whether you are citizens of America or citizens of the world, ask of us the same high standards of strength and sacrifice which we ask of you. With a good conscience our only sure reward, with history the final judge of our deeds, let us go forth to lead the land we love, asking his blessing and his help, but knowing that here on earth God's work must truly be our own. Now the trumpet summons us again, not as a call to bear arms, though arms we need, not as a call to battle, though embattled we are, but a call to bear the burden of a long twilight struggle, year in and year out, rejoicing in hope, patient in tribulation. A struggle against the common enemies of man, tyranny, poverty, disease, and war itself. All this will not be finished in the first 100 days. Nor will it be finished in the first 1,000 days, nor in the life of this administration, nor even perhaps in our lifetime on this planet. But let us begin. Kennedy's inaugural address is remembered for its eloquence, its call to action, and its emphasis on global challenges. The memorable phrase, "Ask not what your country can do for you," has become a rallying cry for civic responsibility and public service. The phrase, "Ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country," is one of the most iconic lines from John F. Kennedy's inaugural address on January 20, 1961. This particular excerpt has become emblematic of Kennedy's call to civic duty and public service. Here is the broader context of that famous line. "And so, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. My fellow citizens of the world, ask not what America will do for you, but what together we can do for the freedom of man." This part of Kennedy's speech emphasizes the importance of collective responsibility and the idea that individuals should contribute to the greater good. It encourages citizens to actively engage in civic life, participate in their communities, and work towards the common goals of freedom and progress. The speech, with its idealistic and inspiring tone, resonated deeply with the American public and left a lasting impact on the nation's consciousness. The events in Birmingham, Alabama, and the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom were two pivotal moments in the civil rights movement during the early 1960s. These events played a crucial role in raising awareness about racial injustice, advocating for civil rights legislation, and inspiring further activism. Here's an overview of each. Birmingham was known for its deeply entrenched racial segregation and discrimination against African Americans. Activists led by Martin Luther King Jr. and the Southern Christian Leadership Conference (SCLC) decided to target Birmingham for a nonviolent protest campaign. Children's Crusade, May 1963. The campaign involved a series of peaceful protests, marches, and sit-ins. The participation of children, known as the Children's Crusade, drew national attention. Use of nonviolent resistance. Protesters faced violent reactions from law enforcement, including the use of police dogs and high-pressure water hoses. Images of these brutal responses were broadcasted nationally, creating a public outcry. Letter from Birmingham Jail. Martin Luther King Jr. wrote his famous Letter from Birmingham Jail during this time, responding to criticism from white clergy and articulating the moral imperative of the civil rights movement. Integration Agreement. Under increased pressure and negative publicity, Birmingham business leaders and the city government agreed to desegregate public facilities and private businesses. The Birmingham campaign was a turning point in the civil rights movement, showcasing the power of nonviolent resistance and the media's role in shaping public opinion. The successful efforts in Birmingham contributed to the momentum for broader civil rights legislation. March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom, 1963. Organized by a coalition of civil rights, labor, and religious organizations, the March on Washington aimed to advocate for civil and economic rights for African Americans. On August 28, 1963, an estimated 250,000 people gathered at the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C. Participants included diverse groups advocating for civil rights, economic justice, and an end to racial segregation. The highlight of the event was Martin Luther King Jr.'s iconic "I Have a Dream" speech, in which he articulated his vision for racial equality and justice. Other leaders and activists also spoke, emphasizing unity and justice. Emphasis on jobs and freedom. The march advocated not only for civil rights but also for economic opportunities and jobs for African Americans. The event sought to address the intersectionality of racial and economic injustice. The March on Washington was a watershed moment, showcasing the solidarity of the civil rights movement and its broad support across racial and ethnic lines. The event contributed to the passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which aimed to end racial segregation and discrimination. Both the Birmingham campaign and the March on Washington played critical roles in shaping public opinion, advancing civil rights legislation, and highlighting the urgency of addressing racial and economic inequality in the United States. These events marked significant steps toward achieving the goals of the civil rights movement.